Doha, Qatar, September 17, 2025. The political storm unleashed by Israel's recent strike on Doha has found its first major voice. Ghazi Hamad, a senior Hamas leader, appeared in a rare live interview on Al Jazeera, marking the first time any Hamas official publicly spoke since the September 9th attack. His words, layered with anger, grief and defiance, framed the strike as an assault not only on Hamas but on Qatar itself, the Gulf state serving as a mediator in the ongoing war in Gaza. The timing of Hamad's statement was as striking as its content. Sitting in Doha, where the attack shook diplomatic nerves across the region, he provided the most detailed account yet of what unfolded inside Hamas's leadership circles when the missiles began to fall. More importantly, he tied the strike directly to a moment of potential negotiation, suggesting that diplomacy itself was the target. On September 9th, Hamas officials were in the Qatari capital to study a ceasefire proposal. The initiative, according to Hamad, had been passed on through Qatar from the United States. The expectation was that Hamas's negotiating delegation would pore over the details and weigh possible concessions, with Doha acting as the trusted mediator. But what followed, Hamad claimed, was a jarring interruption that sent shockwaves far beyond the meeting room. With measured calm but unmistakable intensity, Hamad described the moment when the quiet focus of diplomacy was shattered by sudden violence. Ghazi Hamad said, "We were in a meeting with the negotiating delegation and some fellow advisors focused on studying the proposal we had received from our brothers in Qatar, the American proposal. We had already begun discussing it and examining all its aspects, but less than an hour we suddenly heard the sound of heavy bombing." Those words painted a vivid picture of a turning point. What should have been a step toward compromise became the backdrop for renewed escalation. For Hamad, the significance was clear. The very act of deliberating peace was met with what he called treacherous aggression. The Hamas leader went further, describing in detail the relentless nature of the Israeli assault. He recalled the moments when the roar of incoming missiles drowned out any thought of diplomacy, leaving only chaos and survival. His testimony gave weight to the accounts circulating in Doha of a strike that stunned residents and officials alike. Ghazi Hamad said, "The situation was horrifying. The bombardment was intense, with missiles coming down consecutively without a pause, about 12 missiles in less than a minute. The reality was difficult and harsh, but God Almighty destined us to survive this treacherous aggression against us and against our sister country, Qatar." For Hamad, survival itself became a form of defiance. By explicitly including Qatar in his description, calling the attack one against our sister country, he elevated the strike from a targeted military action to an affront against a sovereign state deeply enmeshed in mediation efforts. Hamad's words were designed not only as a recounting, but as a message. By connecting the strike to a diplomatic meeting, he portrayed Israel's actions as deliberate sabotage of peace talks. In doing so, he also sought to recast Hamas, often framed in Western capitals as an obstacle to peace, as the party willing to at least examine proposals even as bombs fell around them. This reframing is significant. For years, Hamas has struggled with its international image, but Hamad's narrative aimed to shift perceptions. Hamas as the engaged negotiator, Israel as the reckless aggressor undermining dialogue. And by highlighting Qatar as a co-victim, he placed pressure on Doha to sharpen its response while signaling to Washington that its proposals were targeted not just militarily, but politically. The broader implications are difficult to ignore. If the attack was indeed carried out during an active negotiation process, it risks being interpreted as an Israeli signal, a refusal to recognize Hamas's political legitimacy, even in diplomatic channels. For Hamas, it was the perfect illustration of what they describe as Israel's bad faith. The Hamas leader returned repeatedly to the timing of the events. For him, the fact that the attack occurred less than an hour after discussions began was not a coincidence. Rather, it was a pointed move designed to send a message of intimidation. In his telling, it was as though Israel sought to kill not just the people in the room, but the very idea of negotiations themselves. This claim resonates deeply in regional politics. Qatar, long seen as a mediator able to engage with actors shunned by the West, has now found itself targeted. The attack underscores the risks Doha assumes when serving as an intermediary, balancing its role as host of Hamas leaders with its ties to Washington and Western allies. The survival of Hamas's leadership, Hamad emphasized, was no accident. He framed it as divine will, attributing their endurance to God Almighty. This religious framing is typical of Hamas's rhetoric, intertwining political narratives with spiritual undertones that resonate with its supporters. It also underlined his point that survival itself was a form of legitimacy, an act of resilience in the face of overwhelming force. The term treacherous aggression appeared repeatedly in his comments, becoming a refrain that framed the attack as not only brutal, but deceitful. By choosing those words, Hamad conveyed the sense of betrayal that talks of peace were met with strikes of war. Hamad's account inevitably raises questions about how the strike will reshape mediation efforts. Qatar, already under pressure for hosting Hamas leaders, may now face greater scrutiny. The Gulf States Balancing Act, maintaining credibility with Western powers while giving Hamas a political platform, has grown even more precarious. For the United States, which had channeled its proposal through Qatar, the implications are equally sensitive. If Israel's strike truly coincided with the timing of the discussions, Washington risks being perceived as unable to control or coordinate with its closest ally. That perception could complicate its efforts to broker a ceasefire and revive negotiations. At the same time, Hamad's public appearance was a calculated move. By speaking on Al Jazeera, a network watched across the Arab world and beyond, Hamas ensured that its version of events reached a wide audience. It was a reminder that in modern conflicts, media appearances can be as powerful as missiles in shaping the battlefield. Beyond politics and strategy, Hamad's account underscored the human dimension of the attack. He spoke of the terror as missiles rained down in rapid succession. About 12 missiles in less than a minute, he stressed, a detail that conveyed not just military intensity but human vulnerability. The image of leaders huddled in a meeting room, shifting suddenly from deliberation to survival, captures the precariousness of the moment. This personal recounting carried weight because it came directly from a survivor. In conflicts where truth itself becomes contested, the testimony of those who lived through events can become a rallying cry. For Hamas supporters, Hamad's survival and his willingness to speak became a symbol of resilience. For critics, his account may invite skepticism, but it cannot easily be ignored. The interview did not dwell on specific next steps for Hamas, but its political intent was unmistakable. By speaking first, Hamad set the narrative framework that others, diplomats, analysts and governments, will now have to respond to. He positioned Hamas as both participant in peace talks and victim of aggression, a dual role that complicates how others engage with the group. What remains unclear is how Qatar will respond. As Hamad made sure to note, the attack struck not just Hamas, but our sister country, Qatar. For Doha, this characterization places it in an uncomfortable position, one in which it is both host and target, mediator and victim. Whether Qatar will recalibrate its role or double down on mediation remains to be seen. Ghazi Hamad's appearance marked a pivotal moment in the narrative of the Doha strike. Through calm but deliberate words, he reframed the incident as an assault on diplomacy itself, casting Israel as the aggressor, not just against Hamas, but against Qatar, and by extension, the very idea of negotiations. His account left little doubt about his interpretation. Survival was not just personal, but political, a divine endorsement of resilience. The coming weeks will test whether Hamad's version of events reshapes diplomatic efforts or deepens the cycle of retaliation. What is certain is that his words, broadcast to millions, have already etched themselves into the unfolding history of this conflict. We were in a meeting with the negotiating delegation and some fellow advisors, focused on studying the proposal we had received from our brothers in Qatar, the American proposal. We had already begun discussing it and examining all its aspects, but less than an hour, we suddenly heard the sound of heavy bombing.
لكن خلال أقل من ساعة من البدء في دراسة هذا المقترح سمعنا صوت القصف المدوي.
The situation was horrifying. The bombardment was intense, with missiles coming down consecutively without a pause, about 12 missiles in less than a minute. The reality was difficult and harsh, but God Almighty destined us to survive this treacherous aggression against us and against our sister country, Qatar.
النجاة من هذا العدوان الغادر علينا وعلى الشقيقة قطر.